ask them, I ask a lot of questions, and I'm trying to figure out what what is it that we're not doing enough of as career practitioners to help our clients, because we seem to give them all this information and they still seem to be struggling with the decision-making process. Coming from a business background and a psych background as well as an education background, I think that there are some aspects we can take of all those fields and put them together to provide better services to our clients. So that's the question I'm going to ask today. Attending Connexus a few years ago, I was presented with a study that said 1/3 of Ontario high school students spend an hour or less researching their career goals, which I found pretty amazing because I'm pretty sure most of them spend more than that time choosing a prom dress or a new cell phone or a car. If we think about career decision making and we think about our field, we start with Parsons from choosing a vocation. And Parsons said that we should know ourselves and we should understand industry, and then we match those two together. And that's kind of how Parsons' work has been summarized, and that's kind of how our field developed into what it is today. But why do we need to do more thinking about higher order thinking in career decision making? One of the reasons that I believe more than anything else is that because the career decisions we make today become our resumes of tomorrow. And we're all aware of working with clients who didn't take the time to make good career decisions. And because of that, they've ended up in places where they really don't want to be. I see that some people are still having trouble with sound, and I'm going to let Jenny take care of that. Career decision making is a complex problem, and it deserves complex thinking skills. And I don't really think that we take into consideration just how complex career decision making is. I think in many ways we've oversimplified the process in trying to help people make career decisions. But most importantly, our career decisions have a huge impact on our lives, which means if we aren't helping our clients make better career decisions, that can have a very long-term effect on their life and the impact financially, economically, and just in overall life satisfaction and career satisfaction. What works great, though, is that the career decision-making process is fundamentally the same for everyone. So it doesn't matter whether you're switching from school to work, or you're a career changer, or you're recareering, or you're looking at entrepreneurial opportunities. Everybody is basically doing the same process. They're just gathering different information. So the outline for this session is that we're going to be looking at an introduction to higher order thinking skills so that we're all on the same page and we understand what that means. We're going to add more depth to our career decision-making process by adding in higher order thinking skills. And lastly, we want to look at how we can use higher order thinking to examine career theory and identify where the gaps are, because I think what we'll see is that when we look at career theory in relation to higher order thinking skills, that there are some places where we could certainly develop more in our theories so that our clients can have better career decision-making skills. So before we get started, and so to engage you a little bit more in the process too, is I'm going to ask you, what are your favorite career development theories or models that you use with your clients? And what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses for each theory or model? So I'd just like you to take 30 seconds or so and just write down what are the career theories that you use and that you find are most beneficial for your clients. This will also give us a little bit of time for the people who are having sound trouble to maybe get that all cleared away. So we're going to continue now, and I see that from the answers that people have provided is a lot of people use planned happenstance, a little bit of constructivism with metaphors, some of the lifespan, some of Super's work, a little bit of Holland and trait and factor. So let's take a look at just general problem solving and career decision making. This is a real typical career decision making problem solving model. We have a career problem. We're in high school, we don't know what to do. Or we're a plus 50 worker who's been let go from the workforce. Now what do we do? So the first thing that we normally do is look for job postings or do some assessments. We gather a bit of information, we examine our alternatives, and then we choose, and then we move to action. So I'm going to use an example. This is my husband's career decision when he was completing university. He's given me permission to use this story, and I think that his career decision-making process was very similar to a lot of other people's when they were completing university. He was in his 4th year of engineering, and he looked at the 4 or 5 companies that had come to the university to look for new grads. He applied to all of those companies. He got 2 interviews. They both asked him if he wanted to come and work for them, and then he chose one. I think that's a pretty standard career decision-making process for a lot of people, whether it's jobs coming out of university or when we're looking at a job when we're out of work. So now we're going to look at an educational model, which is higher order thinking. And there's 3 levels. The basic level is the knowledge level, where we're looking at basic data that we collect and that we remember, then understanding that information, and then how we can apply it. Then we move up into even more complex higher order thinking skills of analyzing, evaluating, and then at the top of the pyramid we look at creating opportunities. And this next part I'm just going to tell you is going to be a little bit heavy on the theory side for higher order thinking skills, but then I'm going to tie it in with some of the examples to make it a little bit more understandable. So higher order thinking is a concept of education reform based on learning taxonomies such as Bloom's taxonomy. And the idea is that some types of learning require more cognitive processing than others, but also have more generalized benefits. In Bloom's taxonomy, for example, skills involving analysis, evaluation, and synthesis, creation of new knowledge, are thought to be of a higher order, and they require different learning and teaching methods than the learning of facts and concepts. If you think about what is happening in the education system, where they're talking about moving away from just memorization and rote to helping our children become better problem solvers, critical thinkers, all of that, that is higher order thinking skills being applied in the education system. Higher order thinking involves learning of complex judgmental skills such as critical thinking and problem solving. And it's more difficult to learn or teach, but it's also more valuable because such skills are more likely to be usable in novel situations. So if you think of the changing workplace, higher order thinking skills make sense if we want to build on those, because then we have people who have the skills to adapt to an ever-changing workplace. So those are situations other than in which the skill was originally learned. So let's take a really simple example of higher order thinking. If you have a remembering level question, it would be, what does the word thankful mean? So you learn what the word thankful means, and then you basically regurgitate and say, what does being thankful mean? But if we were to give people a higher order thinking task around the concept of being thankful, we might ask them to write their own fable with the moral, gratitude is the sign of noble souls. You can see that you would have to think a lot more to do the second task than to do the first task. The other thing that we want to think of in terms of higher order thinking is that it is seen in 3 different ways. It can be seen as the transfer of knowledge, and certainly in career development we have the case of Transferable skills is a perfect example of this. We learn skills in one situation, then we take those skills and we apply them to another situation, whether it's a new workplace or a new job or a different company. Higher order thinking is also seen as critical thinking. So it's thinking that's focused on believing what we do or what we believe. And lastly, and which I think is most important in career decision making, is problem solving. Is that a problem is a goal that cannot be met with a memorized answer. And I just love that phrase. And many problems are open-ended. Certainly, you can see that career decision making is an open-ended problem. We have many opportunities to have all different kinds of careers. We could make all different kinds of choices. So how do we choose and how do we solve this problem and come up with an answer? So we're going to start at the bottom of the hierarchy around knowledge, and that brings us right back to Parsons again, because Parsons talked about knowledge. He talked about knowledge of self and he talked about knowledge of industry. So when we're looking at the bottom level of higher order thinking around knowledge, it involves three different characteristics. The first one being remembering. And that's where we gather data and then recall facts and concepts. So if we're thinking about memorizing a multiplication table, if we're thinking about memorizing history facts, that's remembering. We're taught something and then we're asked to usually recall or recognize or remember it. With higher order thinking, we then move into another level of knowledge, which is understanding and comprehension, and constructing our own meaning from the information that we've gathered. So some of those processes include interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarizing, inferring, comparing, and explaining. One of the things that I want to explain here too is that there are different levels of comparing. If we look at questions such as, do you want to be a baker or a trucker, that's the comparing in the basic knowledge level of higher order thinking skills. But if we take it to the next level of why would we prefer to be a baker or a trucker, that's actually the next level of analyzing and evaluation. The third aspect of knowledge is applying it, being able to take the knowledge and then execute or implement a procedure. So we get instructions for how to bake a cake, and then we can actually take it and use that information and go and bake a cake. So if we take this bottom level of higher order thinking skills all around knowledge and we take it back to the example of my husband, and what does that kind of look like in practical terms for career decision making? So let's ask ourselves the question is, what if each year of post-secondary, from the time he started engineering all the way through fourth year, he kept asking himself the question, what courses do I like and what courses do I not like? And that's information about himself and also the world of work. And then if he were to ask himself, where could I do the work that I like to do? What industries or companies do the work I like to do? And then he could explore these companies and then maybe apply to them. You can see that in doing this, it raises the level of information that he would have compared and relative to just applying to companies that come onto campus. He would be starting to do his own research and thinking about information about himself as well as industry that he's studying in. So in knowledge and in gathering data, under the Remember section would be information about himself and his interests, occupations that relate to his coursework, and companies that do that work. He would be summarizing what coursework interests him the most and interpreting what he is studying and how it relates to the outside world of work. And lastly, he would be able to explain to himself in his own mind why he was looking at those particular companies. So that kind of takes us from the knowledge stage, and now we're going to examine how higher order thinking skills, the analysis and evaluation part, can be used in career development. So here, analyzing means breaking down information into parts and looking at how the parts relate. And those processes include differentiating, organizing, and attributing. And then if he's evaluating, he's going to be judging the value of material and methods for given purposes based on criteria such as checking and critiquing. So let's go back to the example of David. He starts differentiating what companies and work appeals to him the most. And that's where that comparing is different from the first comparing, where he's just looking at what courses interest him the most and which ones don't interest him. Now he's actually starting to analyze that and saying, what is it about those courses that appeal to him, or what would it be about that work that it would appeal to him. Then he would start organizing which companies he will follow regularly for job opportunities. So this gets into prioritizing and looking at the different options that we have and starting to strategize a little bit about where we really want to focus our career attention. Under analysis and evaluation, he would be continually checking in with himself to see if what first interested him is what continues to hold his interest, and he would be continually evaluating and critiquing his choices by comparing those choices to his values or other personal criteria. Lastly, we look at the creating opportunities, and what does that mean in higher order thinking as well as in career development. So creating means putting the different parts and elements together to form a new whole, or reorganizing elements to form a new structure. So those processes include generating, planning, or producing. This means that he would plan where he would like his career to go in the next 5 years. He would start generating a list of maybe some new careers to follow that he hasn't considered before. But it also means, and I think this is something that we often miss out on in career development, is thinking of completely new opportunities, maybe in research or in work, such as if he has an interest in computer science and he has an interest in thermodynamics, how could he blend those two together, or how could he look for work opportunities that in actual fact use both of those skills together and what is happening in both those fields, and doing some research around that. And rather than choosing between going into thermodynamics or computer science, he actually looks for opportunities where he could choose both. By using higher order thinking skills, and by continually using them throughout our lives in our career decision making, our clients can become stronger career decision makers, better career planners, and certainly more informed employees, which I think is really important, both for industry and for the individual. And I think in the long run, they just become happier, more successful workers because they've done a lot more analysis around what was important to them. We also want to continually be working on our higher order thinking skills because it reduces the amount of time people spend disengaged in school and work. By spending that little bit of extra time up front and working on career planning, career exploration, and career decision-making skills, I believe that we end up in career areas that are of much greater interest to ourselves. It also, in the long run, increases productivity and profits for organizations, I believe, which is beneficial to our economy and to the country as a whole. So it has long-ranging and bigger implications than just thinking about it in terms of each individual client. So does career theory address each of the areas of higher order thinking? So for this next section, what I've done is I've taken higher order thinking skills and I've taken career theory, and I've basically overlaid the two of them, and I'll be giving you examples of that and showing you where different career theory is really strong in certain areas of higher order thinking skills and maybe where we could do some more work. So Chris Magnuson, in his book on career planning, talked about how Parsons had formed the cornerstone of trait and factor theory, which is basically where we start in career theory. And he talks about the knowledge of self, the knowledge of demands and requirements of the workplace, and true reasoning, bringing these two together. And always gets kind of summarized down to know yourself, know industry, and how do we match those two. And what I'd like to demonstrate is that I think it goes a lot further than just matching. So we're going to start with Holland's work as an example of trait and factor theory. So for those of you who remember your career theory, Holland looked at the self-directed search. He created that, and he also created the Dictionary of Holland Occupational Codes, which is a great big huge book that describes every single career at that time in terms of a Holland's code. Now, if you think of the higher order thinking model and you look at the self and industry as the knowledge level on the bottom, and then the analysis and the evaluation part as the next step, and then the create opportunities as the top level. What I've tried to do is show in darkening colors here. I'm hoping that you can see the arrow pointing on the screen. That Holland's code addresses self and it addresses industry, and so I've made those a little bit darker. There's a little bit of analysis and evaluation, more sort of in the comparison. Do I like this better than do I like that? But there's very little in terms of Holland codes that really addresses creating unique opportunities for each individual. So the strength of trait and factor theory is that it does give us some knowledge about self and industry. And I didn't darken these too much because I think it gives us some information, but it doesn't give us a lot of depth, I don't think, in either self or industry. The 6 types do a bit, but when we're specifically just doing the self-directed search, not so much. The dictionary certainly is good in terms of allowing people to see what different kinds of industry choices there are out there. But something that we want to consider is that we also need to analyze the assessments themselves using higher order thinking skills. So the interest inventory, such as the Jackson, the Strong, career cruising, aptitude testing, such as COPS and the Cooter, personality assessment, Myers-Briggs, personality dimensions, DISC, True Colors. That's just an example of some that people use. What actually is being assessed? So the reason that this is important is that when we look at career assessments, we need to ask ourselves questions such as, how many career choices does the assessment really give? If you think of the NOC classification, so the National Occupation Classification Codes, there are thousands of jobs, and yet most assessments only look at maybe 100 or 150, 200 tops. And how many career choices does that assessment really address? Some might address larger career areas, but then how many industries and job titles does it cover? So, and I think that's really important, because if we're using higher order thinking, we want to say, how many career opportunities are we really exposing our clients to? And if it's only 100, well, if their ideal career is outside of that, then they may not even see their option on some of these assessments. So when we look at trait and factor theory and we look at assessments, it is good for giving us some information about self and industry. And it also gives us a little bit of analysis and evaluation opportunities, but it doesn't really look at creating new opportunities. Okay, and if we look at Super's work, he looked at role development and career development inventory. And I'm not sure why some of the parts on my screen are coming up with the words separated. I do have several copies of this PowerPoint presentation, but as far as I know, all of them have the words fully sized, so I'm not sure if it's the screen or what's happening here. So I apologize for any confusion on the words on the side here. If we look at Super's work, Super took self knowledge to the next level of doing analysis and evaluation through his work on roles and Rainbow. So Super, what he looked at is, what are people doing and what are they thinking when they take into account their roles as a youth or a young adult, and how does that differ from the roles that we might be looking at and the career choices we might be making when we get older? So Super's work definitely made sure that we were doing more analysis and evaluation than trait and factor. And certainly in his career development inventory, he did that as well. However, when the focus started to become more on the self, we lost some more information and knowledge around industry. So with constructivist theory, whether you're doing laddering or storytelling or narrative approaches, we can see that constructivist theory really focuses on analysis and evaluation. It focuses a little bit more on self than it does on industry, and certainly it focuses more on analysis and evaluation than it does creating opportunities. And I'll explain why in a second. So in constructivist theory, if you think back when I talked about the comparing, and I said the difference between when we do comparing and trait and factor theory and assessments, we're looking at, do we want to be a baker or do we want to be a trucker? That's a simple comparison. But constructivism actually asks us the why. Why would we rather be a baker or a trucker? And that why is really important in terms of analysis and evaluation and self-reflection and better understanding of ourselves. So that really is the strength of constructivist theory. But if you look, it eliminates some of the aspects of the qualities that trait and factor theory give us, namely industry. And I've had several discussions with some constructivist theorists when they've presented different models and have said, well, this information is great and I understand myself better, so example like the timeline, but how in the end does this help me make a decision around industry and which industries to choose? And they have come back and said, well, actually that is a weakness of the model and we don't really necessarily have any clear answers for that. But I think what's really important to keep in mind is that each theory stresses different parts of the higher order thinking model, and I think that we need to look at why it's important to use a lot of these models in conjunction with each other. So in happenstance theory and chaos theory, which a lot of you said was a theory that you used, these are both social learning theories, and it's all about learning to adapt, which means we don't necessarily make set long-term plans, or we do a lot of career exploration. So the strength of happenstance theory and chaos theory is that they help people be adaptable to the workplace. So that's a good thing. They encourage us to do a lot of analysis and evaluation. They do help us get to know ourselves through a lot of career exploration, and certainly Krumboltz encouraged us to do a lot of career exploration and think about what different job opportunities we might want to try. And I think that that helps with people to become better career explorers. What I find when I work with midlife career changers or when I work with plus 50 workers, most of them have done very, very little career exploration. So we often start back at the very beginning and do a lot of career exploration of different industries and get them thinking about different industries and companies that they haven't thought about before in order to broaden their options for their career decision-making process. One of the things that learning theory certainly talks about is sort of a serendipity effect, is that a lot of opportunities kind of come along by chance and that they aren't always planned as such. And I wanted to address that because I think there's something important to understand and learn here. So if you look at our green circles, we should be learning about ourselves and industry. And if we do that really well, the net result is that we're going to know our business and we're going to understand the business and the field that we're working in. A lot of times when we think of people coming on a chance opportunity where they've met somebody through a networking event and that person said, oh, you're just the right person for me. You need to come and work at our company. We have this great opportunity. And that's really wonderful. And we all dream of opportunities like that happening to us. So one of the things, though, that I want to highlight in this equation is, what if we think about the green circles as us and the knowledge that we're learning about ourselves in the industry? And what if we think about the yellow circle, the know your business, as the other person who comes and asks us if we want this opportunity? What I believe we're seeing is that the person who comes and identifies us as perfect for the opportunity, it's because they know their business. They know their industry really well. They recognize in us the potential. And so I think that a lot of what we think of as serendipity is in actual fact somebody else understanding their business really well, and they understand us and the knowledge of self and the knowledge of industry better than we do about ourselves, and they're able to identify it. So then that's when they pick us up and say, we want you to come and work for us. So what would happen, though, is what if we were the ones who knew that much about ourselves and that much about industry so that we could be creating the opportunities and not just hoping that somebody else recognizes it in ourselves? The next theory, and a lot of you might not be familiar with this is cognitive information processing approach, and this comes out of the University of Florida. And it's no surprise that it is a fairly good fit with higher order thinking skills and speaks a lot to the analysis and evaluation part. But it comes out of psychology theory versus educational theory. And it does look at information about the self, but they really focus on the process, the cognitive process that is involved in making career decisions. So they do a lot of higher order thinking skills. They use a lot of it in their model. But then what happens is when they do that, they lose some of the information on industry. They tend to use assessments a lot in terms of helping people figure out and make their decisions. But again, I think there's a weakness around industry and a weakness around creating unique opportunities for self. And that brings us back to Parsons. And in reading Parsons, what I found is I think Parsons has been really oversimplified. We're going to have a look at what Parsons actually said. Oh, sorry about that. We're going to have a look at what Parsons said about knowing yourself and about knowing industry and about what people have kind of summarized as matching, because I believe actually Parsons was probably one of the clearest in letting us know what we needed to know in terms of higher order thinking skills to understand ourselves in industry and find ourselves a place in the world. What Parsons said is, in describing the knowledge, is he said, in a wise choice of vocation, there are three broad factors. So the first one is a clear understanding of yourself. And what he meant by that is that you knew your aptitudes, you knew your abilities, your interests, your ambitions, your resources, your limitations, and their causes. That's a lot of information about self that's not always included in assessments. It's a lot of information about ourself that we don't always think about, and certainly our clients don't always think about. And it's a lot of information about self that we need to hold in place and then start comparing with industry. So you can see by this visual just how many different aspects that Parsons wanted us to address in knowing ourselves. The next is knowledge of the requirements and conditions of success, advantages and disadvantage, compensation, opportunities, and prospects in different lines of work. So you can see by Parsons' definition of knowledge of industry, it is a much more advanced and descriptive model for figuring out what to do in work than, say, an assessment where you just ask somebody if they want to be a baker. So Parsons would actually want you to understand all the advantages and disadvantages and things that are involved in that industry and in that line of work, which most of us probably are not considering when we're making career decisions, and certainly I know most of our clients are. So again, you can see that Parsons' understanding of industry is much more advanced than a simple matching on assessments. It involves knowing a lot about businesses and industries. And lastly, what he said about analysis and evaluation is that we wanted to look to the relation of these two groups. So when you're considering your career decision, have you found out in what direction your chief abilities lie and in what line you are best adapted to achieve success? So what I want to focus on here are two things. So one is that we have a good enough understanding of ourselves and, more importantly, about industry, and we know what's available to us so that we can actually do what Parsons called true reasoning, which was basically logical scientific research in his mind. And the second part is he wanted us to understand what abilities that we had that would lead us to the greatest ability to achieve success in an industry. And that's different than just choosing a particular job or a faculty in university or post-secondary. He really wanted us to understand when we made that decision how successful we were going to be in that area when we made that choice. And that involves a lot more reasoning. So what happens is we have all this information, and what do we do with it? So if you think about what we do in our career development work is we get people to analyze their values, and we get them to do assessments, we get them to look at the knock codes, we get them to research different jobs and careers or do assessments around different job titles. And so they have all this information, and what I find clients often find is it's overwhelming. So what do they do with it, and how can we help them with some of the analysis? Someone has asked if you're going to have access to the PowerPoint, and the answer to that question is yes. So we need to think about evaluating the information and the knowledge piece. First of all, credibility, and how many of us have clients where certainly, especially young clients, who get very basic information from their friends or parents, and how credible is that information? It may have been relevant 20 or 30 years ago, but it may not be as relevant in today's job market. Or in terms of, are they using good sources off the internet to do their research? Another aspect that we want to look at in terms of evaluating the information is we want to challenge clients on their job snobbery. Industries really change over time, and certainly an example I can think of is when I was younger, trucking was considered a field that people went into if they couldn't go on to university, or they didn't have high school, or they only had high school. But if you think of the transportation industry now and how advanced it has become, and certainly because of a lot of online shopping and all of those changes that have happened in industry, the transportation industry is huge, and it doesn't involve just being a truck driver anymore. Yet we can still have that job snobbery around certain industries. The trade is certainly another area where there can be a lot of job snobbery. So we want to look at a lot of those beliefs and values that our clients have around certain areas, because they may be limiting themselves in their career decision making. The last point is values. And certainly when we're evaluating information, what I liked is Gray Pennell did a session at BCCDA on values conflict. And I really liked that because he talked about how our values can be in conflict with society's values. They could be in conflict with our parents' values. We can even have values, two different sets of values, where one value is in conflict with another value of our own personal values. And also, how can we use our values to make better career decisions? So all of that is important in evaluating the information that we're getting and coming in to make a decision. So one of the points that I just want to touch on moving forward is, for the analysis and evaluation piece, is that when we look at counseling versus education. So one of the things that's happened, and one of the reasons why I think that we don't focus as much on industry as we probably should in the career decision making process, is that a lot of career development has come out of the counseling field. And in the counseling field, we focus on the self and knowledge about the self. Oftentimes what we do, and spending so much time on helping people better understand themselves to make good career decisions, is that we don't always help them with the amount of information that they're going to need about industry and about work. So in analyzing industry information, what we're really talking about is we want people to know the business that they're in. And I often hear this as a complaint of a lot of managers and a lot of people at executive level. They will say that their employees don't understand their business, and because they don't understand the business, then it becomes a problem for the whole organization. So part of our role, I believe, is in helping people understand that they are a part of a business and they are a part of an industry. And so how can they help the industry by being more informed? What information do we need to give our clients? Certainly, we need to share the information about the changing workplace. People need to know that we're no longer a factory mentality workplace, that we are moving to an information age workplace, and what exactly does that mean to them and the industry that they're working in. We also need to help our clients understand the gig economy that is coming out of this information age. And certainly a lot of baby boomers are very intimidated by the gig economy. They find themselves unemployed. They want to find full-time work because that's the concept they have in mind. And one of the things that I help my clients do in this particular demographic is I help remind them that they actually did the gig economy back in their teen years. That they did whatever gigs they could to earn money to buy their car, buy their bike, whatever it was that they were looking to do with their money, save money for school. So they're already actually familiar with the gig economy. They don't think of it, though, in terms of their current work situation. We also want to think about factors impacting the workplace. Are we educating all of our clients on what Phil Jarvis calls the perfect storm? All of those things: technology, the baby boomers retiring, immigration, globalization, the environment, climate change, all of the things that are impacting the workplace in different ways. Are we doing a good job of educating our clients around those factors? And lastly, industry trends. Industry trends happen slowly over time. Lots of times they happen and we aren't even aware that they've happened. So a good example of this is if we look at the top 50 companies in the US, and we're kind of a mini version of the US, and a lot of what happens there relates here too. But in 1967, of the 50 top U.S. companies, 10 were oil and gas. In fact, oil and gas was the top industry, which, that's what Alberta still believes, and that's where I am, and people still believe oil and gas is the top industry. But in actual fact, over the last 50 years, there have been 5 other industry sectors, such as healthcare and technology, that have surpassed oil and gas, even with it booming in the U.S. There were 10 oil and gas companies in the top 50 in '67, and now there's only 3 in 2017. So you can see that the industry trend has changed a lot, and yet a lot of people's mentality has not necessarily changed to reflect those industry trends. Why is this so important? We are competing globally. And if we want to help our companies compete globally, then we need to better understand how we can be of service to the workplace. That means as practitioners, we need to help our clients understand industry and help them understand that they aren't just making a job search choice. They really are making an industry choice as well, and that they are part of an industry and they are contributing to that industry. Also, by doing this work, it helps us find more satisfying work. I always find when the clients take the time to do the research and really look at industry and themselves, that they come up with much more satisfying work options. They're also better able to see the work opportunities that are specifically suited to themselves. Because the better you know your industry, the better you can see the opportunities. And this brings us to the last section of higher order thinking skills, and that is the area on creating. If we're going to create new opportunities for ourselves, then we really need to know the workplace, and we need to know about factors impacting the workplace. We need to keep up with the industry, and we need to recognize the potential opportunities. So how do we do that? Well, in the book Job Shift by William Bridges, who did a lot of work on transitioning and work transitions, he talked about how we are going to have to shift from jobs to work, and how to look for work versus just looking for jobs. And how do we do that? One of the ways that we do that is we identify the problems and look for the opportunities that could come from those problems, and that often leads to work. And in this example that I'm going to use, I'm actually going to use myself. A long time ago, I used to work in oil and gas, and my position was a joint venture auditor. Our audit schedule was set for the year, but oftentimes the operations department would come to us and say, we need these 2 or 3, audits to be completed, and our supervisor would try and figure out how we were going to fit these into our already packed schedules. I had just had a baby and was coming off of mat leave, and I really didn't want to go back to work full-time. I saw this as a potential opportunity. The company had a problem. They didn't always know how to complete these audits. It meant oftentimes dropping audits that they didn't want to do. And I came back and said, you know what, I don't want to come back full-time, but I already know the system, I already know the work. I would love to come in as a contract worker and do these audits for you and help them out. So they went along with that, and one of my supervisors from one of the other companies I worked for, he had gone independent as well, and I also did the same thing for him. So I was able to work a quarter of the year full-time and stay home 3/4 of the year with my children. So it worked out perfectly both for me and for the company. I see people asking questions about the books, and I will pass on that information in just a second. I think some people have typed it in as well. So you can see that when you understand your business and you understand the problems of your business, that you can also understand the opportunities and the work that's available and create opportunities that are unique to you. So if we go back to our favorite career development theories and models that we use with our clients, my challenge to you is, how could you add more higher order thinking to your favorite theories or models? oftentimes we can do this by simply adding in another career theory that balances out the one that we're using. Or the other thing we can do is ask a lot of questions that will help get our clients thinking. So it doesn't really matter which model we use. What we want to be thinking about is, does the model that we use, are we covering knowledge of self? And think about all those different areas that Parsons covered. Are the models that we're using, does it address all of those different areas? Does the model that we're using address all those different areas of industry? And how can we supplement our career theory models with models of industry that will help people understand the work world much better so that they know where their place is? So again, just in summarizing, if we think about higher order thinking skills, it's about taking knowledge, what we remember and understand, and applying it. It's analysis and evaluation, and it's creating opportunity. And lastly, as a summary, higher order thinking is, we can think of it as transfer, so the transfer of knowledge, and certainly transferable skills and career development fit in that. It involves a lot of critical thinking. I don't always think as practitioners we really truly understand just how many different variables people are taking into consideration when they're making a career decision. And that's why I think we need to work a lot more on educating our clients on the whole career development process, because they really do need a lot of skills in order to do all of this career development work and fit into the workplace. And last, just a reminder that career decision making is a problem that needs to be solved, and it can't be solved with a memorized answer. The problem of what do we want to do with our life, what is our passion, is open-ended. What I believe is that by using more higher order thinking skills, we will reach that level of creating opportunities, and we will reach that level of finding our passion and our purpose in work. So how I like to think of it is that if we think more and that we plan more, that leads to being more. I want to thank you very much for listening in and attending this webinar. My contact information is here. You will have access to the PowerPoint presentation. If you still have any questions about any of the books that I referred to, so Parsons, Choosing a Vocation, or Job Shift by William Bridges, I certainly recommend, if you haven't read either, that you pick them up. You can tell that Parsons wrote his book 100 years ago. I'm not going to lie, there's some stuff that's pretty outdated, but in terms of really understanding how to choose a vocation, I think he did a great job. If you have any questions at all, my understanding is I am available for a little while here, and I can ask you and help you. I really hope you enjoyed the information. Feel free to connect with me on social media and let me know how you're using the information. I would really appreciate any comments that you have to make. There's so many comments flying by, I can't read fast enough. So I'm hoping that I will get a little copy of the chat so that I can see. Thank you all of you for all of your comments. I really appreciate them, and I really hope that you enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed giving it, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you at BCCDA. I'm a regular attendee. I'm being asked, what are my sources for industry? Certainly the NOC, but also ONET, which is the US career development site. If you guys aren't familiar with that, It's got tons of information. I really love that. And also, if you go to my website at the bottom, there is a resources link. I'm just going to type in here. Yeah, if you go to the bottom of my website, I have a resource link, and it has ONET, and um, it has the NOC classifications, and it also has a page for Alberta industry, but a lot of that information would be relative to or relevant to BC as well. I agree. I just got a comment that we don't always get our clients to think more, and I certainly think that they could use more thinking. Yes, so Parsons' book is Choosing a Vocation, and it was written 100 years ago. Like I said, Frank Parsons is his full name. And if you just type in Frank Parsons, it comes right up on Amazon. And certainly if anybody else has any questions of just in general of around career decision making, or what you would like to see more of in the area of career decision making, I would love to connect with you. This is an area that I'm really passionate about, and I present regularly at BCCDA. And so if there's a specific topic that you would like me to maybe do a concurrent session on, I'd be very interested in finding out what you have to say. I agree with Lori. She talked about future focus coaching. What are you doing? What's happening around you? Absolutely.
Okay, everyone, I think that's it. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you so much, Anne. It was a really big help.
And I
It's a
agree
very
with
interesting topic.
Aurea too about we're often so passionate about giving people information that we don't always ask them questions about making a decision. One simple question that I often ask people in the career decision making process while I'm working with them is I will actually ask them, do you think, when they're still struggling with the decision,
Yeah,
is do you think you need more information about yourself, or do you think you need more information about industry
thank
to help you make a decision? And they always know the answer to
thank
that.
you.